Welcome to A Dram of Outlander. This is Desiree, your podcaster and the writer for adramofOutlander.com for all things Outlander, from the Diana Gabaldon book series to the Stars TV series and everything in between. This is episode 82, The Scottish Prisoner, week 14. When we left off last episode, they were headed toward the monastery at Inishclara in order to get Tom Byrd the medical attention that he needs for being shot in the arm. And Jamie also wants to speak to Abbot Michael about Tobias Quinn's plans, about the Druid King's Cup, and yes, the questions will come up about John Grey being broken out of Castle Athlone and if he actually killed Major Syverley or not. Remember that John had stumbled ashore, still quite affected by the opium potion that he had drunk before they were on their way. Man, he has a dreamy imagination, doesn't he? And one of the things I wanted to share from an email that I received after the podcast is from Jan. And she said she loved the long podcast. I know they've been short with me sticking to 2 chapters only. And she called them a archetypal motley crew. Tom is the devoted, capable, creative, and appreciated valet. Tobias, the single-minded, calculating, ill-fated zealot. John, the honorable, privileged, sensitive, intrepid soldier. And Jamie, the valiant, resourceful, enduring, loyal pragmatist. Imagine being on that boat ride. Thank you, Jan. I agree. She described them all perfectly well. This has been a fascinating trip through all of their personalities and getting these insights that we might never see in the Outlander books proper. And it is very strange to see how Jamie handles himself without Claire. What does he really do? How does he respond to things? He does things very well, but it seems like there's a piece of him missing, like something is out of order. And he's not quite as grounded, per se. Let me know what you think about that. So we enter the monastery with them being greeted with a cautious air and a concerned air from the monks. And Tom is taken away to get the medical attention that he needs. Quinn and Grey are left with food and they're eating, and Jamie goes to see Abbot Michael. And as soon as the abbot sees him, he offers him a place to sit and a dram of whiskey. For both, Jamie is appreciative. And he says to Jamie, "You do lead the most interesting life, Jamie dear." After Jamie quickly explains what has happened recently. Is he there for sanctuary? Are these the 2 men that he had told Abbot Michael about prior? Yes, these are the same men. But Jamie doesn't think that the deputy justiciar would honor sanctuary of a church. It's interesting that this is here because for hundreds of years, if somebody was under threat of persecution, they were being hunted down, they were in trouble, they would go to a church and they would say it was sanctuary, and it was in a very literal sense. So the law, whoever the law was, could not come and retrieve them out of there without it being a very big deal. And as long as somebody remained in sanctuary and didn't leave the church or the church grounds, they were considered untouchable and safe. When you look through the history of the English monarchy, and especially the War of the Roses, when you go way back, sanctuary was used often. And the fighting among the royals and among the court was incredible and terrifying. I would never have wanted to be in a position of power during that time frame. But that's the meaning of sanctuary, that they would be left in peace, they were untouchable by the law, and somebody could go into sanctuary while people on the outside were getting things fixed for them. But Jamie doesn't think that the deputy justiciar would heed that whatsoever and would simply come in and take Gray, and probably Tom and Jamie and Tobias, because they all colluded and broke him out of jail. The abbot is wondering if Colonel Gray, John, murdered Major Syverly. What does Jamie think of that? And Jamie is sure John did not murder him. He thinks it's somebody called Edward 12 Trees. He calls him a miscreant. When he mentions some sort of associations with Syverly, the abbot wants to know more, but Jamie just kind of waves his hand vaguely. And he thinks, oh, how his shoulder burns like fire, and his arse isn't much better after rowing and sitting on a hard slat. He doesn't know exactly what 12 Trees was doing with Syverly, but it had to do with money. And at this, the abbot's white brows rose, his eyes intent. And then he goes on to tell the abbot that he brought Tobias Quinn with him. He's the man from Jamie's confessions. The abbot remembers, but the information was taken under seal, so he cannot make use of it whatsoever. But now he's telling him outside of the seal that Quinn wants to take up the destiny that Jamie refused to. And he wants the abbot to speak to him and pray with him about it. And Abbot Michael says he will, and asks if Quinn knows about the Druid King's cup. This causes a visceral and physical reaction for Jamie. A shudder runs over him from his head to the base of his spine. He got the willies. Ooh, makes me shiver thinking about it. He absolutely knows about the cup, and he explains that to Abbot Michael. But Jamie doesn't want to talk about it, doesn't want to hear about it, doesn't want to see it ever again. And the abbot raises a hand to Jamie and tells him to go in peace, and may God and Mary and Patrick go with you. I love the traditions and the symbolism and the blessings that are in the Catholic Church. How comforting would that be to have a priest raise their hand to you and tell you to go in peace? Jamie went outside to sit on a simple stone bench, and that's where Gray found him. Poor John looked exhausted and pale and a mess, and quite unfocused still. That darn tonic. And Jamie says, "Give you dreams, did it?" All John can do is nod at him, and he doesn't want to tell Jamie about them, and he wouldn't want to know anyway. And Jamie thinks that that's really likely true, and seeks after Tom Byrd's welfare. Well, his bone's not broken, he has a small fever, the ball is out of his arm, and he seems to be doing pretty well. Maybe in a day or two they can leave. And Tom has already been sitting up eating porridge with milk and honey. Oh, yes, Jamie's tummy decides that food is in order, and he's lets him know all about it. At the hearing of food, Jamie's belly gurgles and lets him know how wonderful that sounds. But there are other things to do first. As always, Jamie does what's necessary, not what he wants to be doing at the time. Jamie asks John if he thinks it's worth it. And Gray's not quite sure what he means. And he starts to talk. And he's thinking, yes, Tom will be fine. And Jamie says, do you think it was worth it? What? Tom Byrd. He'll likely do fine, but you ken well enough he might have been killed and yourself too, or taken. And you and Quinn, yes, we all might. You mean you think I was a fool to ask you to get me out of Athlone? If I thought that, I wouldn't have done it. But I'd like to know why I'm risking my life when I do it. John thinks that's fair. Edward Twelvetrees. I'm morally sure he killed Syverly. Jamie wants to know what motive Twelvetrees would have had. And John goes in to explain that there was some sort of financial arrangement between Syverly and Twelvetrees. And he remembers the books that he saw, the amount of pounds and shillings and pence were written down. And it was so considerable. And that was definitely an accounting of some sort. And that chest, it was not filled with gooseberries, he says. Well, if Syverly has the money now, it looks like he was involved in the Jacobite conspiracy. But it is possible. John is pretty certain that Twelvetrees is the one who killed Syverly. And Jamie wants to know why. Why might he have done it? Or what does John think as to why he would have done it? And he didn't even wait for Jamie to reply here. He just keeps speaking. The financial arrangement, what he saw written down on those papers. And now if Syverly has the money, it looks very obviously like there is a Jacobite conspiracy going on. And though it's possible that Twelvetrees was not involved, John can't determine that. And John can't figure out what he is, what his family is. And since they've been loyal to the bone, they've been soldiers for generations, he cannot see Twelvetrees committing treason. It doesn't make sense for the man's character, regardless of whether John likes him or not. History speaks for itself. And Jamie asks if he thinks that Twelvetrees discovered what Syverly was into, maybe because John visited and he killed him to prevent him from carrying out the scheme, whatever that scheme was. John thinks that's an honorable theory. And the dishonorable one is that Syverly held all this money, presumably on behalf of the conspiracy. He might simply have killed Syverly to pocket the money. And regardless of which one it was, there might be proof of it in the papers that Syverly had. So they're now moving on to the next stage of this investigation. Now, how easy do you think it'll be for them to get back to Glastuig? I mean, wouldn't it be being watched by some soldiers? Wouldn't the deputy justiciar have people posted there? I don't know. It seems odd that they're going to be able to have access back to that house very easily. John's hand curled into a fist as he spoke. Who else does that? Jamie also does that, unconsciously, when something is bothering him or he's angry. John needs to get back into that house and read those papers. He wants to see what proof there might be. Is it a political conspiracy? What is the connection between 12 trees and him? It must be there. And Jamie now has to determine whether or not he's going to fess up what Minnie said to him about 12 trees and that money and keeping John far away from that. She did not share it with Hal or John. And he was wondering why him and why not them. So Jamie thinks her father, Andrew Rennie, was the source of her information. And she didn't want Pardlo finding out she was still dabbling in intelligence work for him. Now, Jamie couldn't blame her for that. And now he can see the situation is more serious than whatever marital strife the revelation might have caused. Because she had said she didn't want to be anxious to see him fighting, because she didn't want him to fight another duel. He had forgotten that, and now he remembered. So it wasn't only her father she was concerned with. It was that it's what could happen if Pardlo dueled, either literally or figuratively, with Edward 12 Trees. What things would be uncovered, what would be unmasked. Nothing is quite as it seems. So Jamie decides that he can keep her confidence while sharing the information. He tells John that he knows that 12 Trees has been moving large quantities of money to Ireland. To Ireland. He doesn't know where it's going, nor did the person who told him. But what are the odds it was going to Siverley? This makes John rethink motive. And if this was the case, then it could have been a plotter's falling out. But he didn't like the idea of 12 Trees being a traitor still. He thinks maybe 12 Trees could have been misled in what the money was going for. And he discovered the truth. And that's why he killed Siverley, to stop him. Jamie decides that John is absolutely right. They need to see the papers. And there's no better way to figure out what's going on. But could 12 Trees already have them? And he realizes it had only been one day since Siverley was killed, because so much happened in that day. The constable had sealed the house until the coroner could come, and John doesn't think 12 Trees could simply walk on in and take anything he wanted from the house at that point. And John thought they would have been going back to Glastuig straight away from breaking out of Athlone. But as he thinks about Tom Byrd, things happen, and they didn't. Jamie points out the other significant probability of these papers is that they could name the other conspirators, the members of the Wild Hunt. And that might even be more important than finding out anything about 12 Trees. So he's trying to steer this a little bit. But John and 12 Trees have already seen each other. He already saw him with Siverley. He's making presumptions based on what he's seen. But we really don't know what 12 Trees is doing there. So John stands up and he's done. He has a wordless conclusion, and he says he will go and speak to Abbot Michael, thank him, and make provision for Tom to stay until they can come back for him. And he asks Jamie if Quinn will see them back ashore. And Jamie thinks he will for sure. And then John answers the question Jamie had originally asked, if he thought it was worth it. He doesn't know, but it's his duty, regardless. How many times has Jamie been roped into something, had something required of him that he probably never would have done on his own, and he didn't think was worth it, but he was charged to do it, so he did it, and that's what John is doing here. Gray is walking away toward the building, and then he stops absolutely dead while his hand is already reaching for the latch. And Jamie says to himself, he's just thought that he did not ask me whether I'd go with him. What does that mean? Because Cyverley's dead. So Jamie has kept his word, he's honored his obligation, and it's over. Anything he does from here is on his own accord. Anything he doesn't do is on his own accord. So he would have to be asked or offered to do anything further by John. And he knows that John just realized this, that Jamie is a free agent here. And he stands there at the door and then shakes his head. And Jamie reads this as not dismissal, but as he's going to do the business at hand with the abbot first, and then he will talk to Jamie. Then Jamie thinks, and what will I tell him? Jamie doesn't care about Cyverley or 12 Trees. It doesn't matter to him. But the Jacobite conspirators being exposed. He knows he's already thought about it, and he wonders why he can't leave it alone. Why can't he let it go? Why does it matter to him? And he's recalling the oath. I, James Alexander Malcolm Mackenzie Fraser, do swear, and as I shall answer to God at the great day of judgment, I have not nor shall have in my possession any gun, sword, pistol, or arm whatsoever, and never use tartan, plaid, or any part of the Highland garb, and if I do so, may be cursed to my undertakings, family, and property. May I never see my wife and children, father, mother, or relations. May I be killed in battle as a coward and lie without Christian burial in a strange land, far from the graves of my forefathers and kindred. May all this come across me if I break my oath. The oath was forced. And that was the oath after being caught. They had to swear this to the crown. A forced oath, are you obligated to it? He didn't come to it on his own. He didn't say it freely or willingly. He said it so he could live, so he could continue. Is he under obligation to that oath? I would say no, and I think Jamie thinks he's not under obligation to it, but he also takes oaths seriously. He's loyal. He's trustworthy. And if he's committed to something, he will follow it through, whether or not he believes in it or agrees with it. And it says here, the words of the oath they made him speak when they spared his life had burned his lips when he spoke them. They burned his heart now. He likely knew none of the Wild Hunt personally, but that didn't make betrayal of those men any the lighter of a burden. He didn't think Stuart could get back on the throne. I mean, Claire told him it wasn't possible. She told him it couldn't be, that history was already written in the future. That's a mind mess, isn't it? But Jamie was a Catholic, and some part of him would have loved to seen a Catholic king come back. This wasn't about Scottish freedom. This was about a rightful heir in the minds of the Catholic citizenry. And so I think if Jamie hadn't known Claire and known what she prophesied, so to speak, that he would have willingly joined up. He would have taken arms for this. And he feels like he's betraying these Jacobites even still. So he has to make some decisions. But now he's thinking of that skull under a gorse bush, and it weighed heavier. Stepping on that skull when he was out. Of the wee lassie. Does he leave these Irish lunatics to their business? Or does he help Gray? Or does he keep Gray from stopping them? He thinks that both amounts to the same thing. It was a betrayal to wee Mary. Abita, or Karistana, all of them, those girls, he doesn't know which one was that skull. But it would be a betrayal to them and their memory and their deaths. And so then he says to himself, well then, that is my duty, and I think the price is not too high. He knows he needs food, but he had no willingness to do it. You ever been bone weary like that? Where you're hungry, you're thirsty, but you can't will yourself up to get anything. The idea of even lifting a hand to prepare something is too much. So he takes the rosary from his pocket, and he just held it for comfort. And he just sits on the bench, and the tiredness flows out of him, and peace settles upon him from this place. I imagine the weariness draining away. And he hears the bell from the church, and it marks the hour. And the gardeners lay down their hoes, and they shake the dirt from their sandals, and they go in. He saw a teenage boy, and the boy sees Jamie. And he comes to him and says, Mr. Fraser, you'll be. Mr. Quinn asked me, would I be handing this to you? So he gives a letter to Jamie and runs back toward the chapel. Jamie knew what it was. It was Quinn's farewell. So he'd gone to use the cup. John Gray would have to find another ferryman. Jamie thinks this is ironic, considering where he just decided his duty lay, but he had promised Quinn to speak to the abbot and would just have to leave the matter now to God and hope the Almighty shared his view of the situation. He almost didn't open the note, but he had to. He says it was neither addressed nor signed, but here's what it says. You've a great loyalty to your friends, and God himself will surely bless you for it on the last day. But I should be less than a friend to myself did I not tell you the truth. It was the Englishman who did for Major Siverley. I saw him with my own eyes, and as I was watching from the wood behind the summer house. Captain Twelvetrees is a great friend to our cause, and with Major Siverley dead, the means lie now in his hand. I urge you to protect him and give him what help you can when you return to London. God willing, we will meet there, and with our other friends see the green branch burst into flower. So, 12 is part of the conspiracy? Huh. He's saying he saw John kill Siverley, or the Englishman meaning 12 And he says he was there. There was no other way for him to have the information that he had except he had to be present. Do you believe him with what he's saying? Jamie crumples the note and he sees John Gray had come out of the abbot's office, and he was speaking to Brother Ambrose. I had a goat once named Ambrose, but he was named after the author Ambrose Bierce. So Jamie is grimacing, and he puts the rosary back in his pocket. The note is now in tiny pieces, and he scatters it to the wind. Friends, God help me. So this is still a bit of a mess. And we have the murder to solve. We have this uprising to deal with. Had the abbot told him where the cup was? I mean, because it seemed clear to me that the abbot had wanted this cause to move forward. It was pretty plain. So Jamie is battling this line because he doesn't have to do anything with John. His duty is complete for the undertaking that they had set out here. So he has to battle with his conscience still and to decide what he's going to do and who he might betray in all of this. Chapter 28, Amplexus. What is amplexus, you may ask? It is Latin for embrace. It's a type of mating behavior exhibited by some extremely fertilizing species, chiefly amphibians and horseshoe crabs, in which a male grasps a female with his front legs as part of the mating process, and at the same time, or with some time delay, he fertilizes the female eggs. Well, there you go. So what does that have to do with this chapter? Well, we're going to find out. So, Jamie refuses to have Gray hire horses because he knows that the Irish gossip as much as Highlanders. And if they saw Gray in his uniform, the castle would know by the following day. So they kept to the fields as they walked. And it was through the night from Loch Ree. And in the day, Jamie went into Ballybonaghan for food. Then they went back into the woods and did not go onto the roads until dark. They kept up a good pace. And there was a sympathetic moon that rose above them, pale and mottled as a ball of gleaming alabaster, it says. The countryside was empty of both people and anything else. They went from meadows to wooded areas to clustered trees, and the road was invisible beneath their feet. And then all of a sudden there'd be a clear spot where the trees drew back a little, and the moon caught the sudden white flash of face or shirt front, the glint of a sword hilt. You couldn't even hear the shuffling of their feet. The wind was rising, the leaves rattled, and John felt as if the night was creeping upon him. The force of spring was rising from the ground into his feet, his legs, bursting through his body, till the blood throbbed in his fingers and pulsed in his chest. What does that mean? It's something beautiful, but it makes me wonder what the imagery is supposed to represent. Was it freedom, being exhilarated from the escape, the excitement, or that he was an outlaw with pursuit and danger certainly behind him? He's never been an outlaw before. He's never had to get busted out of jail. These are feelings that Jamie is well aware of. He's been hunted and pursued much of his adult life. And even after years under parole at Hellwater, Pardlow still came and grabbed him and forcibly had him removed back to London. So we see the description of the road being narrow, and as they walked in the dark, they would bang into each other on occasion because they'd get blinded between the darkness and then the brilliance of the moon hitting them on occasion. Have you ever walked that way where you're stumbling into the person next to you because you really have no choice? He thinks he can hear Jamie's breath. It seemed part of the soft wind about his face. He could smell Jamie, his musk, the dried sweat, the dust in his clothes, and he feels like a wolf, feral. Longing changed to hunger. He wanted. Master me, or shall I your master be? John needs a boyfriend. He needs somebody that is powerful and strong and big, that he can be an alpha over. Nobody can be an alpha over Jamie. There were frogs in the ditches and the bogs that lay beyond the scrim of the trees. They called. It was a cascading sound over one another, and it was a chorus. He thinks if somebody was sitting on a lawn with that chorus as the background, watching the stars come out, the sound might be no more than a pastoral, the song of spring. But up close, though it was still the song of spring, the song could reveal what pagans had always known it to be: the blind urge to seize, to mate, to spill blood, and seed heedlessly into the earth, wallow in crushed flowers, writhe in the juices of grass and mud. Sexy sounds of spring. Those bloody frogs were shrieking their passion, raw-throated and triumphant. Hundreds of them. The racket was deafening. Amplexus. So John is being distracted by the vision of amphibians, thousands of them, locked in slime-wrapped sexual congress amid the dark waters. And he catches his foot in a root and falls heavily. To be so distracted by amphibian fornication. Jamie was close to him, and he grabbed him, catching him and jerking him upright again. Are you all right? And all John says in response is, croakle dumho. Jamie steadies him. Great Lord Frog to Lady Mouse. It's a song. I'll sing it to you later. Fraser made a Scottish sound in his throat. Maybe amusement, maybe not. And he lets go of John. John sways and nearly staggers, and he has to put out a hand to steady himself. He touches Jamie's chest. It's warm and solid through his clothes, and he swallows hard and takes his hand away. This seems the sort of night on which one might meet the wild hunt itself, Gray says. His skin prickles and jumps. He would not be surprised to see the Queen of Fairy riding out of the wood, spectral and fair as the sailing moon, terrible in her hunting, her pack of attendants, all young men, lithe and sharp-toothed, hungry as wolves. What are they hunting, do you suppose? Men. Souls. I was thinking the same myself, though you see them more on a storm-tossed night. Have you actually seen them? No, at least, that is, tell me. So John wants a story. They haven't spoken much. And really, the intrusion of the sexually hungry frogs needs to be silenced. So Jamie is thinking and gathering his thoughts. And the rhythms are shifting as Jamie moved. And he says, years back, it was after Culloden. I lived on my own land then, but hidden, in a wee cavern in the rocks. I'd come out at night, though, to hunt, and sometimes I'd have to go far afield if the hunting was poor, and often it was. As they moved into a clearing, Jamie looks up at the moon. It was not a night like this, really, nae moon at all, and the wind going through your bones and moaning like 1,000 lost souls in your ears. But it was wild, you might say. Wild in the way this is. A night when you might expect to meet with things, should you venture out. His speech was matter of fact. You know, like it was totally normal to meet things in the night. This leaves John wondering how many nights Jamie had spent roaming, alone beneath blazing stars or a clouded vault, with no touch on his skin save the wind's rough caress. I'd run down a deer and killed it, and I'd sat down by the carcass to catch my breath before the grollicking. That's the cutting out of the bowels, Ken. I'd slit the throat, of course, to bleed the meat. But I hadna yet said the prayer for it. I wondered later if it was maybe that called them. And so John was trying to figure out if that was the hot scent of blood or the lack of a sanctifying word. But he didn't want to have Jamie stop, so he didn't ask. Them? Perhaps. Only all of a sudden I felt afraid. Nay, worse than afraid, a terrible fear came upon me. And then I heard it. Then I heard it. I was afraid before I heard it. Them. He had heard the sound of hooves and voices, and they were enveloped by the moaning wind. Was it some years before? I should have thought it was the watch, but there wasn't any such thing after Culloden. My next thought was that it was English soldiers, but I couldn't hear any words in English, and usually I'd hear them easily at a distance. English sounds different, Ken, than the Gaelic, even when you dinna make out the words. I suppose it does, Gray murmurs. The other thing was that I couldn't tell which direction the sound came from, and I should have. The wind was strong but steady from the northwest, and yet the sounds came sometimes out of the wind, but just as often from the south or the east. And then they would disappear and then come back. And he goes on to say that he was standing over the body of the slain deer, wondering if he should run, and what way if he ran. And then I heard a woman scream. It wasn't a scream of fear or even anger. Well, it was the way women will scream sometimes if she's pleased. In bed, you mean? So do men, sometimes. That's what John said. And then he thinks of himself as such an idiot of all the things he could have said to Jamie. He would have continued to berate himself simply because it echoed his unfortunate remark in the stable at Hellwater. That injudicious, criminally stupid remark. But Jamie merely made a deep and he acknowledged it at face value. And Jamie thought for a moment a woman could be raped but there were no English soldiers in the district. Scots do not commit rapine. Not often, not Highlanders. But as I say, it did not sound like that. Then I heard other noises, screeching and skellicks, and the screaming of horses, aye, but not the noise of battle. More like folk who were roaring drunk, and the horses too, and it was coming closer to me. It was the thought of drunken horses that had put the vision of the wild hunt into Jamie's mind. It was not a common tale of the Highlands, but he'd heard such stories, and heard more from the other mercenaries when he'd fought in France as a young man. He explains that the Queen rides a great white horse, white as moonlight. Jamie had spent a lot of time on the moors and in the high crags. He knows and wonders how many ghosts and spirits lingered there, how much unknown to man, and the thought of supernatural creatures wasn't foreign to him. And once the thought of the wild hunt had come to him, he had spared not a moment in leaving the deer's carcass as fast as he could. He thought they smelled the blood, and he had not said the rightful prayer to bless it. They'd think it was their prey. This made John prickle at the nape of his neck, this acknowledgement. And all I can say is, I see. To him, it's a helter-skelter rush of the unearthly horses' coats and fairy faces glowing with spectral light. They're screaming and howling for blood. And now the sound of the lust-crazed frogs strikes him different. He could hear the blind hunger in it. And all Jamie said was, she. And John thought it sounded like a sigh of wind. I love the descriptions in this chapter. It's so pictorial. Like you can see every single aspect of the supernatural. You can feel the nature around you. You can feel the darkness. Feel that tension that's around. It's the same word in Scots Gaelic as in Irish Gaelic. It means creatures of the other world. And he says, but sometimes when they come forth out of the stony duns where they live, they dinna go back alone, so they may take someone with them. He had gone to a nearby burn, and he tried to remember, but he thought that the she could not cross running water. So he threw himself over it, and he staggered, and the water was to his mid-thigh, and it was dark, and his eyes were tight shut. You dinna want to look upon them. If you do, they can call you to them, cast their glamour upon you, and then you're lost. John wants to know if they kill people. Fraser shakes his head. No, they take people. They lure them in. They take them back to their own world. Sometimes the stolen ones come back, but they come back 200 years later, and all they knew and loved are dead. John thinks this is terrible. And Jamie's breathing is heavy, like he's trying not to cry. And he wonders what moved him so much telling this story. Well, we know what moved him so much. Claire. So Jamie says he spent the rest of the night in the burn and almost froze to death. And if it hadn't have been near dawn already, he doesn't think he would have come out again. He could barely move when he did. And he had to wait for the sun to warm him before he could make his way back to where he'd left the deer. John wanted to know if the deer was still there. And Jamie says most of it, someone or something, had grollocked it neat as a tailor's seam and taken away the head and the entrails and one of the haunches. Oh, the huntsmen share. The mythology. And John asks if there were any tracks around it other than Jamie's. And Jamie says there weren't. Even though John is illogical, a shiver went through him. And thinking about Jamie, this educated gentleman, a bit of the old ways had never left him. Those traditions, those superstitions, the mythology, the supernatural had never left him. And he's so modern and ahead of his time, yet he's still steeped in the old ways. It's fascinating. And John asked Jamie if he took the rest of the deer. And Jamie did. He couldn't leave it because he had a family to feed. And at this, they walked in silence, in their own thoughts. The moon had sunk when they had reached Glastuig. And they were able to go through the gate because it was only shut. There was a light coming from a distant window. He asked Jamie if he knows which room it is. Jamie says it's the library. What do you want to do? It's amazing, all the things they undertake, and they've just walked miles. Miles. They've walked through the night and day, and now they're ready. I can't imagine the state of their feet. I can't imagine how dirty they are, how worn their clothes look. I mean, we would just get into our car and go. Imagine the time it takes if you had to walk everywhere. And if it was 20 miles, it would take you a couple of days to get there. So John decides that they're just going to go in and see what's going on. They were cautious, of course, and Jamie had pointed out that the horses were gone. The servants had left, it looks like. They did not want to remain there where murder had taken place. And the livestock would have been taken to the village too. So who was this nocturnal visitor? John couldn't think of any reason why a legitimate executor of an estate would need to make a surreptitious visit. It was well past midnight. I mean, that's not normal for someone to be there working that late. Maybe the man was staying in the house and found himself awake, and he came down to search for a book. Gray thought with a mental shrug. Occam's razor worked more often than not. Occam's razor is a principle attributed to the 14th century logician and Franciscan friar William of Occam. Occam was the village in the English county of Surrey where he was born. The principle states that entities should not be multiplied unnecessarily. Sometimes it is quoted in one of its original Latin forms to give an air of authenticity. Pluralitas non est ponenda sine necessitate. Frustra fit per plura quod potest fieri per potiora. Entia no sunt multiplicanda praeter necessitatum. There you go. Many scientists have adopted or reinvented Occam's razor. And the most useful statement of the principle for scientists is, when you have two competing theories that make exactly the same predictions, the simpler one is the better. Keep it simple, stupid. Gotcha. So John thinks that they were within pistol shot of the house now, and he feels self-conscious as he steps out onto the lawn. It was lit like a stage, but there was no dog barking, no voice calling out, demanding to know why he was there. But he still walked gingerly, footfalls soundless on the untidy lawn. So he's creeping along like a cat trying to make no noise. The window casements were above eye level. Well, above his, he says. And it irritated him that Jamie, who had come up silently behind him, was able, by standing on his toes, to see into the house. He says the big Scot shifted to and fro, craning to see, and then froze. He said something out loud in bloody Gaelic. John thinks it might have been a curse of some sort. He asks him what he sees. It's that wee arsewipe 12 trees. He's going through Siverley's papers. Gray almost didn't hear the second part of this. He was heading toward the front door and ready to break it down. It was unlocked, so he didn't have to. And he opened it so hard it crashed into the wall of the foyer. And 12 Trees yelps from the library at this. And Gray charges in. He's blazing. I'm no going to break you out of that bloody castle again, just you remember that. He's telling John to simmer down, apparently. There was another yelp from 12 Trees as they burst into the library. He was crouched behind the mantelpiece, and the poker was clutched in both hands, and he was holding it like a cricket bat. Put that down, you bloody nit. What the devil are you doing here? That's what Gray asks him. Now 12 Trees is no longer alarmed. He's outraged. What the devil are you doing here, you infamous fiend? And this makes Jamie laugh. And Gray and 12 Trees glare at him. I beg your pardon, gentlemen. Be going on with your business. Dinna mind me. Jamie is amused. Jamie looks around, and he picks up a small wing chair that had been knocked over in Gray's entry, and he sits on it, and he's waiting with an air of pleased expectation. So 12 Trees is glaring between them. He does not know what to do, and Gray has to suppress an urge to laugh, even though he's angry. I repeat, what are you doing here? And of course, because 12 Trees likes to repeat what John says to him, it seems. He wants to know what he's doing there, and how dare he enter the house of the man that he so foully murdered. Oh, this makes Gray blink. He'd forgotten he was an outlaw. Welcome to Jamie's world. He says he didn't murder Major Siverley, and he asks if 12 Trees did it. And 12 Trees calls him a cur. What is a cur? An aggressive dog, a mongrel, or a contemptible man. And he was going to try and brain John with the poker. But Gray caught his wrist and managed to pull him off balance. 12 Trees lurched and staggered, but he didn't fall down, and he elbowed Gray in the face with his free arm. So now they're having a bit of a row. Yes, these two. So John gets the wind knocked out of him, and he doubles over. All this is going on. He grabs 12 Trees by the ankle, so they're just duking it out. And Jamie's just sitting there. But 12 Trees knocked his head against the battered mantelpiece, and he lay sprawled on the hearth. But then Jamie gets up, and he sees Jamie reach down and haul 12 Trees clear of the fire. And then he rises and grabs the shovel and scrapes the smoking mass of papers out of the hearth, and he scatters them onto the floor. So he's trying to salvage the papers from the fire. He flings his coat off and throws it onto the half-charred papers to smother the sparks. 12 Trees protests, but Jamie deposited him on a settee with good force. And he looks at Gray and asks silently if he requires some similar service. Gray shakes his head and he's wheezing. His ribs are bruised. He awkwardly is to his feet. And he says, "You could have helped. You managed brawly on your own." Words of praise from Jamie. So 12 Trees is dazed. John has a bloody nose. And then Gray says, "I'll take that as a no, shall I? You say you did not kill Major Siverly?" So 12 Trees says he didn't do it. We know John didn't do it. And he says, "What kind of flapdoodle is that?" Wow, 12 Trees has some interesting language. John wants to know, was there more than one sort of flapdoodle? And if so, what categories might it be? But then he ignored it because he realizes it's rhetorical. But I like that his little inner 3-year-old wanted to ask more questions, even though it was totally inappropriate. So Jamie was going through the piles of paper on the desk at this point, and 12 Trees yells at him to stop it at once. And Jamie so calmly says, "How do you mean to stop me?" Yeah, 12 Trees does not have the sword he goes reaching for. He tells John he has no right to examine the papers because he's a murderer and an escaped outlaw. And then Gray wants to know what right 12 Trees has to be examining them. He says, "By the right of law, I am the executor of Gerald Siverly's will, charged with the discharge of his debts and the disposition of his property." "So put that in your pipe and smoke it," is what his expression said to John. 12 Trees says that Siverly was his friend, a particular friend. And Harry Quarry, had told John that much, that they were intimates. But he had no idea that 12 Trees had been appointed executor of his estate. And so if they were so close, he had to have information about Siverly's actions, right? So John's back on his feet at this point and notices that the iron-bound box was gone. And he wants to know what 12 Trees did with the money. Apparently, it's where John cannot get his thieving hands on it. And Jamie was now collecting the pieces of half-charred paper, handling them very carefully. And he asks if he should search the house. And then Jamie thinks, no, he's carried it off already. And Gray says to Jamie, "You're quite good at this business of outlawry." "I will. I've had practice." So he pulls out a paper that he thinks that would be of interest to John. It was the Wild Hunt poem. It was only one page, and Jamie turns it over. 12 Trees hissed. The Wild Hunt. Captain Ronald Dugan, William Scary Pender, Robert Wilson Bishop, Fordham O'Toole, Eamon O'Crea, Patrick Banyan Laverty. So, John didn't know any of the names on the list, but the look of fury in 12 Trees' face, now he knows he won't go back to hell totally empty-handed. It must be the list of conspirators, almost certainly the Irish Jacobites. So, had it been Fraser or himself that had thought the poem was a signal of recognition? It was Jamie. But a signal for whom? This was the partial answer to that. Men who didn't know each other personally would recognize others in their group by the showing of the poem. And on its face, a bit of half-finished, innocuous verse, but in reality a code readable by those who held the key. And Jamie looks at 12 Trees, or nods toward 12 Trees, and says, "Is there anything you want me to beat out of him?" This freaked out 12 Trees a little bit, and his eyes got wide. Gray wanted to laugh, but he didn't. Though it was tempting, he doesn't think it would be productive, and he's going to go have a look around and tells Jamie to keep 12 trees where he is. He doesn't think there's anything to be found in the house from the look on 12 Tree's face, but he wanted to go around and look at the bookshelves and wander through the house a bit to see if there was anything secret in Syverly's bedchamber. He thought the house was oppressive, maybe sadness of standing in the dead man's chamber. The bed has already been stripped, mattress rolled up. It was covered. The furniture was covered in dust sheets. He says only the moving gleam of candlelight from the damask wallpaper gave a hint of life. He felt curiously empty, as though he himself might be a ghost, viewing the remnants of his own life without emotion. The heat and excitement of his confrontation with 12 Trees had been drained away. He felt flat. There was nothing else to be done here. There was no rest of 12 Trees. And regardless of what he might discover, Syverly was dead, and his crimes were dead with him. And his place shall know him no more. And the words fell and vanished among the silent shapes of the sleeping furniture. He turned and left, leaving the door open on darkness. So, what are we left with? Jamie knows that Quinn is going ahead and trying to pursue this uprising. His plan, or the plan, whoever's plan it was. They also have a list of names that are likely part of the conspiracy. We still haven't gotten to the meat of 12 Trees. Like, we've been told nothing. He's really said nothing. We just know that the money is gone. Well, was that the Crown's money coming in to help trap Syverly in this? Was he trying to stop Syverly? Was he the murderer? It doesn't seem he was the murderer. But we don't know. This is much more of a thriller. So now what is Jamie going to do? What is John going to do? Because really what he came to Ireland for was Syverly. It was to hold him accountable for the crimes that were being lodged against him. So what is John going to do? I mean, Syverly is dead, and he came to Ireland to take him into custody so he could be held accountable for the alleged crimes that he committed. And now we have a Jacobite conspiracy to contend with, perhaps. It's still building. It seems like we've gotten somewhere, but not really. We don't have any answers. We don't know who really murdered Syverly. We don't know what 12 Trees' involvement really is. We don't know what Jamie will ultimately do, except he chose the side of helping John and not helping the Jacobites. Or rather, not stopping the Jacobites while helping John pursue what he needed to pursue. And then Tom Byrd needs to be collected from the monastery at Inishclara. And John is an outlaw. How is he going to get away from Ireland and get his name cleared? There's so many storylines. These strings left flapping out in the wind. I really adored the second chapter and the vivid detail of nature that was going on there and being surrounded by it and cloaked in it almost. It was really lovely. And really, who doesn't enjoy some lusty amphibian sounds of spring? Poor John, that just reacted to his core unconsciously. It just burst in him. The man needs a partner. He's not as skilled as Jamie at keeping those things at bay and keeping them at a subtle roar underneath everything. It just shows up and slams into him. Poor guy. Well, next episode, we will be covering 29 and 30. That will be week 15. And we have 13 more chapters after to cover. So where can you find a Dram of Outlander? Well, the website is adramofOutlander.com. Facebook is a Dram of Outlander page. You can also ask to join the private A Dram of Outlander group on Facebook. That's for listeners only. On Instagram and Twitter, it's Dram of Outlander every Wednesday night, unless I'm baby catching. We have our hashtag ADoO Twitter chat, where we cover the prior week's podcast. And sometimes we just have a rip, roar, and laugh. You can please email me at contact@adramofoutlander.com with any questions, thoughts, comments, ideas for the podcast. You can call into the voice listener line at 719-425-9444 with all the same as you would email me. If you would like to support A Dram of Outlander, there's a variety of ways. Join the social media pages or interact with other listeners and other Outlander fans. Come into the Wednesday night Twitter chat and join in. It's really wonderful every single week. Of course, you can financially support the podcast. You can make a one-time contribution. You just have to email me for details about that or go to patreon.com/adramofoutlander to do a monthly offering of your choice of amount. And the biggest way that you can support the podcast is sharing it with people, posting it on other pages, in other groups, retweeting it on Twitter, sharing it on Tumblr, doing all those things. That is going to bring more people listening. You can leave a review on iTunes because that will help people find me easier. But that's the best way that you can show your support. Thank you for listening. As always, I appreciate you coming on this journey with me. It is a weekly act of love for these books and these characters. And until next time, Slán je va.